Welcome back to the Whole Bible series. This week we are surveying the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah is part of the writings in the Tanakh. In our Bibles, they are part of the Old Testament historical books. These books record the initial return of the Judahites, or some of the Judahites, from exile in Babylon, and it details the rebuilding of the city wall and the reinstitution of the law. Ezra and Nehemiah was originally one book. It has been split into our Bibles into two books. In the Septuagint, it's actually called Esdras. There's Esdras A and Esdras B. Esdras A covers part of the end of the book of Chronicles and into the book of Ezra, whereas Esdras B covers Ezra and Nehemiah. There are some other writings too, known as Third Esdras and Fourth Esdras, and these are apocalyptic books. For more information, go back to episode 10. So here we are where we're at right now with Ezra and Nehemiah. This is the 15th and the 16th book of the Old Testament. So Hebrew tradition holds that Ezra and Nehemiah was written by the scribe Ezra, although the text gives us no clues as to its author. Because the text of Ezra resembles Chronicles, many scholars believe this was written by the same person that wrote Ezra and Nehemiah. Both Ezra and Nehemiah contain first-person accounts from both Ezra and Nehemiah, but most scholars believe this text was assembled by one person, also being the same person that compiled the Chronicles. The text is typically dated to the late 5th century BC. Again, for more information, go back to episode 10. So we've broken up Ezra and Nehemiah into 5 sections. Here's where we are on the timeline here. So this is the timeline that we've been using as we've gone through the historical books, and we're getting to the end of this timeline here. So you can see that Ezra and Nehemiah covers approximately from 539 BC to 430-ish, 424 BC. So we left off at the end of 2 Kings. We had the Babylonians that were the big bad guys on the block. They had taken over this entire area, including exiling Judah to Babylon. Soon thereafter, they were taken over by the Persian kingdom. And so the Persian kingdom is where we are now. The Persian kingdom has taken over the Babylonian kingdom and even expanded that even further. And so Judah has been in exile since 586 BC, and they're stuck in Babylon, wondering if they'll ever be able to go back to the land that God had promised them, the land that he allowed them to be taken out of because they broke his covenant. Let's start on the first section. So chapter 1, verse 1 of Ezra. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Let's pause real quick. Cyrus, also known as Cyrus the Great, was the king of Persia and became lord of Judah when he conquered Babylon. And so he took over reigning this territory in 539 BC. So the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, puts us at approximately 539 BC. Back to the text. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it into writing. Let's pause there real quick. We'll get to the book of Jeremiah later on, but Jeremiah basically prophesied that the inhabitants of Israel would be exiled out of the land for 70 years. So we are now getting towards the end of that period. If they were taken out at 586 BC, then gives us close to that 70-year period. And so this is what the writer is referring to here. Verse 2. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and has charged me to rebuild him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to the Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Then let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So pause real quick. So we see there that Cyrus recognizes Yahweh as the King of Heaven, or the King of Heaven, and as the one who's granted him the opportunity to lead this giant nation of Persia. And he says that Yahweh has spoken to him and told him to build the temple. And so now he's offering a chance for some of these Jews who are living in Babylon to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Verse 5. Then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. And all who were about them aided them with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, with beasts, and with costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. Cyrus the king also brought out all the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. So here, when Jerusalem was sacked and Nebuchadnezzar and his army took everything away, now Cyrus the king is restoring those things to the people to take back to Jerusalem and place in the new temple. So approximately 50,000 Israelites and servants returned to Judah. These are mostly from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Remember that Simeon lived within Judah, so there's some of the Simeonites there. And then there's a lot of Levites there also, because the Levites had got pushed out of the northern tribe of Israel. And so most of them were living in Judah at the time of the Babylonian exile. So we have people from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and Simeon. This is what makes up what then becomes known as the Jews. So they're led by Zerubbabel as their governor and Jeshua as their high priest. Let's get to chapter 3, verse 1. When the 7th month came and the children of Israel were in the towns, the people gathered as one man to Israel, or to Jerusalem. Then arose Jeshua the son of Jozadak with his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel with his kinsmen, and they built the altar of God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set an altar in its place for fear was on them that because of the peoples of the land, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening. Then they kept the feast of booths, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by a number according to the rule, as each day required. And after that, the regular burnt offerings, the offerings at the new moon, and all appointed feasts of the Lord, and the offerings of everyone who made a freewill offering to the Lord. From the first day to the 7th month, from the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord. But the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. So they gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food, drink, and oil to the Sidonians and the Tyrians, to bring cedar trees from Lebanon to the sea to Joppa, according to the grant that they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Just a little note here about Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the governor of Judah following the Babylonian exile. He rebuilt the temple, which we're going to see here. And he is identified by Haggai, who's a prophet, as a grandson of King Jehoiachin. And so he's part of the royal line of David, and even later on listed in the genealogy of Jesus in the books of Matthew and Luke. Verse 8. Now in the second year, after their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem in the second month, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak made a beginning, together with the rest of their kinsmen, the priests and the Levites and all who had come to Jerusalem from the captivity. They appointed the Levites from 20 years old and upward to supervise the work of the house of the Lord. And when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments came forward with trumpets, and Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord, according to the directions of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever towards Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though that many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joyful shout from the sound of people's weeping. For the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. So now we have the second temple being built, or at least being started to be built. So then we have some difficulties. So the people living in the land, if you remember from the northern kingdom, the Assyrians had conquered them, and they had taken most of the northern tribes away and had intermixed peoples from all over the known world in with the people that remained in the land. And so the people in the land, both native Israelites as well as peoples that were foreign, come and they want to help build the temple because they had been worshiping Yahweh all this time. If you remember that these people are living in Yahweh's territory, and so they wanted to worship Yahweh. But while they were worshiping Yahweh, they were also worshiping their own gods, their own household gods. And so the Israelites refuse. They don't want these people to be a part of what they're doing because they are not Israelites and they are not loyal to Yahweh. And even the people that do have relations to Israelites have intermarried with foreign peoples, and so they're now of a mixed race. And so this is where we have the genesis of the Samaritan people, which will become an issue in the New Testament. And so the Israelites refuse them, and because they refuse them, these people start trying to make the Israelites, or excuse me, the Jews' job difficult. They start trying to intimidate them and start bribing some of the officials to stop the building of the temple. So in 522, Artaxerxes comes to the throne, and Jerusalem's neighbors petition the king to stop the construction of the temple. And so the king halts construction. A year later, Darius comes to the throne, and Zerubbabel starts building again. This is a new king, and so he starts building again, and the people again petition the king to stop construction. And so Darius has his people go back and research and finds why the temple was allowed to be constructed in the first place. And this is his response in chapter 6, verse 7. Let the work of this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding what you shall do for these elders of the Jews for the rebuilding of the house of God. May the God who has caused his name to dwell there overthrow any king or people who shall put out their hand to alter this, or to destroy the house of God that is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, make a decree. Let it be done with all diligence. So not only does Darius approve that the building of the temple should continue, but he also tells that the people around them that they need to not hinder them, but even to help them by supplying them with whatever materials that they need to do so. Verse 13. Then, according to the word sent by Darius the king, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, so this is west of the Euphrates River, so there's a governor who's in charge of all that area, which includes Jerusalem. His name Shethar-Bozenai, and their associates did with all diligence what Darius the king had ordered. And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo. They finished their building by decree of the God of Israel, by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. So in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king, it coincides here with 515 BC. So if you remember, we'll go back a few pages. The first year of King Cyrus is when they set out for Jerusalem, so it was 539, and the temple is completed in 515 BC. And so the people then come into Jerusalem from all over Judea, which is formerly of the tribe of Judah, what's left of that territory, and they come to Jerusalem to dedicate the temple. On the 4th day of the 1st month, the returned exiles kept the Passover, for the priests and the Levites had purified themselves together. All of them were clean. So they slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the returned exiles, for their fellow priests, and for themselves. It was eaten by the people of Israel who had returned from exile, and also everyone who had joined them and separated themselves from the uncleanness of the peoples of the land to worship the Lord, the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had made them joyful and had turned the heart of the king of Assyria, here talking about the king of Persia, to them, so that he aided them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. So now we're getting into Ezra's story. So all this has been more a history or a preamble of what's happened prior to Ezra. So this is what we've seen so far is the very first part of the people coming back to Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple by the decree of the king. Let's get to the second section. Chapter 7. Now after this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, the son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Merioth, son of Zerahiah, son of Uzi, son of Buki, son of Abishua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. This Ezra went up from Babylonia. So here we have Ezra introduced, and he's introduced with his entire genealogy that runs all the way back up to Aaron. And so this genealogy is simply showing that Ezra's lineage runs back all the way to Aaron, and therefore not only is he a Levitical priest, but he's an Aaronic Levitical priest. He's the Levitical priest in the line of Aaron. Continuing on, he was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given, and the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. And there went up also to Israel in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. So this gives us a time frame. And you'll see down here at the bottom left corner that Ezra returns in about 458 BC. So that the 7th year of Artaxerxes coincides with approximately 458. So this is the time period that Ezra is approaching the king. I remember that the temple was finished in 515 BC, so we're looking at almost 60 years later. Again, back in verse 7. And there went up also to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, some of the people of Israel and some of the priests and Levites, the singers and gatekeepers and the temple servants. And Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For on the first day of the 1st month, he began to go up from Babylonia. And on the 1st day of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. So it took him 4 months to travel from Babylon to Jerusalem. For that good hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. So Artaxerxes comes to the throne in 464 BC, which we can see on the chart there. And he gives Ezra permission to go to Jerusalem in 458 BC or around that time. And along with that, he allows any Israelite that wants to return to Jerusalem to go with him. And so we have approximately 4,000 to 5,000 people that go with Ezra back to Jerusalem. So here's a little map of Ezra's journey to Jerusalem. Remember, he's in Babylon, so he's leaving Babylon and going to Jerusalem. So this takes 4 months for him to travel along the Euphrates and then down into Jerusalem. Chapter 9. After these things had been done, the officials approached me. This is Ezra speaking from the first person. The officials approached me and said, "The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands with their abominations, from the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with the peoples of the land. And in this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and the chief men have been foremost. As soon as I heard this, I tore my garment and my cloak and pulled hair from my head and beard and sat appalled." So he's mourning here. Verse 4. Then all who trembled at the words of the God of Israel because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles gathered around me while I sat until the evening sacrifice. And at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my fasting, and my garment and my cloak torn, and fell upon my knees and spread out my hands to the Lord my God. So we have here is, remember, the people started coming back. We had almost 50,000 people come back in the 530s, around 536, 537. And since that time to now in 458, so in a period of 80 years, we have again, these Israelites have given themselves over, the Jews that are there have given themselves over, a lot of them, to intermarrying with the other nations around them. Here he says that the officials and the chief men, so the leaders of the people that are there, have been the worst. And so Ezra falls on his knees and he prays and he confesses the sins of the people. And the people confess their sin and promise to return to Yahweh's law. And so they covenant to send away their foreign wives and their foreign children. And they make guilt offerings to Yahweh and purified themselves. But there's so many of them that it takes 2 months to complete this. So that's the end of the book of Ezra. We're coming into Nehemiah's story now. And so let's go on to the next section. Chapter 1 of Nehemiah. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, in the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name. And give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Excuse me. Now I was cupbearer to the king. So Nehemiah finds out about how bad Jerusalem is in way of being structurally sound now, and how bad things are going. And he prays to God. And then he has a note here that at this time, around 445 BC, he's serving the king as his cupbearer. Chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So this is the same king that we just talked about with Ezra, but this is about 13 years after that. So the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. When wine was before him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing that you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why shouldn't my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. So again, Artaxerxes comes to the throne at 464 BC. Ezra approaches him and is able to head back to Jerusalem in 458 BC. And now we see Nehemiah, who serves him as his cupbearer, who gets permission from the king to go back to Jerusalem, or to go to Jerusalem. He's never been there before, in approximately 445 BC. And so here we see Nehemiah's journey to Jerusalem. He's coming from the fortress of Susa. So Babylon was the capital of the Babylonians. Susa is then the capital, or you see here on the map, the winter capital of the Persians. So Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem and inspects the city wall and finds that the walls are all broken down and that the gates are all destroyed by fire. So you see a little picture of what the city would have looked like at that point before it was destroyed. So this is how much of the city wall is destroyed. This entire thing is destroyed. And so Nehemiah is in awe of the devastation. Chapter 2, verse 17. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned." This is Nehemiah talking to the people in Jerusalem. "Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision." And I told them of the hand of my God, and that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, "Let us rise up and build." And so Nehemiah begins inspiring the people. and they begin to help him rebuild the walls. The high priest and the other priests go and rebuild the sheep gate. And from there, families start to rebuild the wall near their homes. And so everyone is pitching in. There's not a group of people that's building the entire wall, but in fact, lots of different groups of people that are building small portions of the wall. And so they're all working together to make this happen. uh, Soon thereafter, the authorities nearby, so these other nations that are around them, find out what's going on and they oppose the work and threaten to come against Jerusalem and the rebuilding effort. But God frustrates their plans. And so Nehemiah, knowing that these nations are trying to stop them from building the wall, uh, breaks up the people, and they begin to have 50% of the people guarding the weak points of the wall while 50% of the people build. And they're so adamant to get this done and to protect themselves that the men actually sleep with their sword in their hands, ready to fight should anything happen in a moment's notice. Nehemiah then corrects the Israelites who are taking advantage of the poor. And we get to verse 14 of chapter 5. Moreover, from that time I was appointed to be the governor of the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years. Neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on the wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. So remember, Zerubbabel is the first governor when the Jews returned to Jerusalem back in 537. But it's clear from what Nehemiah says here that in between that time that the governors had become ruthless. So they started taking advantage of the people and to really lay their leverage on them so that they could build up wealth for themselves instead of taking care of God's people. And so Israel's enemies continue to try to frustrate them, and they try to lure Nehemiah out so they can kill him, but he doesn't fall for their trap. And they continue to intimidate the people while all this building is going on. Then we get chapter 6, verse 15. So the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month of Elul, in 52 days. So with everybody working together, all these people working on small portions of the wall, they finished the entire wall in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Now, when the wall had been built and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun is hot, and when they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. So the wall has been finished, and Nehemiah is now taking his governor role and starting to implement changes in the city and to rebuild these people, these Jews, into the people of God. So we get to the next section. So they gather the people together, and then Ezra comes out. Ezra is functioning now as the high priest. Ezra comes out and he reads the entire law. So he reads the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So he reads all 5 books, from morning to midday, and the people all stand and listen. And we find that the Levites have to help the people understand the law. And there's a couple of reasons for this, but I want to make clear that not only is there maybe possible misunderstanding in the law itself, but that many of the people that returned from Babylon no longer speak Hebrew. Remember, the Bible is written in Hebrew. The law is written in Hebrew. Many of these people don't speak Hebrew. And so there's a note down here that I want to share with you from the Lexham Bible Dictionary. It says the Aramaic was the common language of much of the ancient Near East from circa 600 BC to the first centuries AD. Large portions of the books, or the biblical books, Ezra and Daniel, are written in Aramaic, as are Jeremiah 10:11 and 2 words of Genesis 31:47. Aramaic became the official language of the Assyrian and Babylonian empires and was eventually the official language of the Persian Empire. So this is where they just come out of the Babylonian and Persian empires. The Assyrians first encountered the Aramaic language when they conquered the Aramean peoples living in Syria. The Hebrew Bible was translated into Aramaic. These translations are known as Targums. All right, so these Targums were to come later. For now, the people have the Bible or the law in Hebrew. And so while they were exiled, the Levites, the people who were meant to be priests, they continued to learn Hebrew and to study in Hebrew. But the common person learned the common tongue, which was Aramaic, while they're in Babylon. And so the people come back, and a lot of the people don't speak Hebrew. They only speak Aramaic. And so there's a lot of translation that needs to be done by these Levites to help them understand the law. Now, Aramaic is going to continue all the way through the Greek period and into the time of Jesus. It is the common language of the Hebrew people. And so people in Jesus's time would learn both Hebrew and Aramaic if they went to school, but Aramaic was the common tongue for them. Getting back, so Nehemiah and Ezra then declare the day holy, and the next day the people begin to celebrate the feasts of booths. We get to verse 17 of chapter 8. And all the assembly of those who had returned from the captivity made booths and lived in the booths. For from the days of Joshua, the son of Nun, to that day, the people of Israel had not done so. So going all the way back to the book of Joshua, it's telling us that the people had not followed the law in the the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And so there was very great rejoicing. And day by day, from the first day to the last day, he read from the book of the law of God, talking about Ezra. So Ezra read the book of the law every day for 7 days. They kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day there was a solemn assembly according to the rule. Excuse me. So the people then confessed their sin. They've heard and they've learned the law. For those that did not know it, the people confess their sin, and then the leaders seal that they're going to covenant to Yahweh. They seal the covenant to Yahweh. I just want to, before I read chapter 10 here, just note here at the bottom that God is not involved in the renewal of this covenant. The Israelites are recommitting themselves to the previous covenant that was given to them by Yahweh that they abandoned. And so God's not involved at all. This is merely the Jews dedicating themselves to Yahweh, or back to Yahweh. Let's get to chapter 10, verse 28. The rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the temple servants, and all who have separated themselves from the peoples of the land of the law of, or to the law of God, their wives, their sons, their daughters, all who have knowledge and understanding, join with their brothers, their nobles, and enter into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law that was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord, our Lord, and his rules and his statutes. We will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. And if the peoples of the land bring in goods or grain on the Sabbath day to sell, we will not buy them from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day. We will forego the crops of the seventh year and the exaction of every debt. Excuse me. We also take on ourselves the obligation to give yearly a third part of the shekel for the service of the house of our God, for the showbread, for the regular grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed feasts, the holy things, and the sin offerings to make atonement for Israel, and for all the work of the house of our God. We, the priests, the Levites, and the people, have likewise cast lots for the wood offering to bring it into the house of our God, according to our fathers' houses at times appointed year by year, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. We obligate ourselves to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of every tree year by year to the house of the Lord. Also to bring to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God, the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstborn of our herds and of our flocks, and to bring the first of our dough and our contributions, the fruit of every tree, the wine and oil, to the priests, to the chambers of the house of our God, and to bring the Levites the tithes from our ground, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all our towns where we labor. So here again, the Jews are just reiterating themselves to the law. They're dedicating themselves to following the law that God had given them through Moses. And so the people cast lots to repopulate the walled city of Jerusalem. So the wall had been now restored. And so they start rebuilding the houses inside the walled city of Jerusalem. So there's houses both inside and outside of the walled city. And so 1 in 10 families were chosen by lot to go and live inside the walled city of Jerusalem. The remainder of the people lived either outside of the wall or in the surrounding towns and villages, all throughout the area of Judea, which is formerly a part of Judah. So you see a little map here. Excuse the sample stamp on there. It's the best map I could find. So Judea makes up this green portion. And so these are all the towns that surround Jerusalem where the Jews are now living. So then the priests are organized and the wall is dedicated. And we get to the end of the book of Nehemiah. So here in the end of the book, Nehemiah begins reforming things that are going on in the city and being a good governor. He removes all of the Ammonites and the Moabites from the assembly. Per Deuteronomy 23, these people were not allowed to be a part of the assembly and to worship Yahweh with them. And so he removes those people from their presence. He also cleanses a chamber of the temple, as one of the priests had been using it improperly while he went back to see the king. He regulates the distribution of the priestly portions to make sure that it's according to the law and that it's fair. He stops people from working and selling on the Sabbath. So there's people that were trying to come into the city on the Sabbath and to sell, and so he stopped that from happening. And then he chases off the last of the intermixed peoples, trying to bring the people back to the original people that God wanted them to be, or God had designed them to be. So I have a note here. What occurs in Ezra-Nehemiah is the genesis of the legalistic culture which we see playing out in the pages of the New Testament. So we'll talk about that a lot when we get there. But just know this is kind of how it starts. The people with Ezra and Nehemiah begin to dedicate themselves to the very details of the law. They study the law, they come to know the law, and they follow it to the T. And in fact, even add onto it to make sure that they don't accidentally break the law. And so this is kind of where the people are at now. They're learning, and they're so afraid of being exiled from the land again that they're going to do whatever it takes to not break God's law again. All right. So this is kind of where we leave off the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And so we have, just reiterating what happened here, Zerubbabel comes and leads the rebuilding of the temple. But in rebuilding the temple, God's presence does not return. His presence doesn't come back to the temple and rest on the footstool. The ark is gone, and God is no longer dwelling there. Ezra then led the rebuilding of the altar. Nehemiah led the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, and he governed the people well. And Ezra taught them the law. But while the Jews are back in the promised land, they're not an autonomous people. They don't have a king. They don't get to lead themselves other than having a governor that reports to the king. These are people that are ruled by others. And they're now back in the land, but they're without the blessing and the protection of the presence of Yahweh. And so this is where we leave off Ezra and Nehemiah. Hope it helped you understand a few things, and we're definitely going to be looking back on this as we get into the Second Temple period and into the New Testament. So if you have any questions, please comment below. We'd love to hear them, love to answer your questions. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.